which is why I personally believe that Hatha Yoga is the highest form of yoga, because it literally deals with a physical restoration of the physical body and then the subtle centers after that. I'm not such a big fan of other forms of yoga, which I think are very, very insidious. But the principle underlying yoga was the idea that, yeah, you're not in a proper sane state. You're not connected to nature anymore. You have a broken mind. So let's try to do something to fix it. And there was many other ways that the ancients attempted to do this, both in their archaeology, architecture, and so on. As we said, what is the result? The sum result, the total result of this trauma we're talking about was nothing less than the ego. And one of the most incredible things about the ego is that it's a troubleshooter. One might even describe it as a sort of entity that creates problems in order to have a job. It loves to be maintaining its own problems. Not that I'm bashing the ego, we need it. And in fact, the ego is probably the only part of us that is really interested in freedom and differentiation, as we talked about last time. But then there's a whole cocktail of other problems that we've had up through the centuries. Go back to the agricultural revolution, go back to the feudal age. Until recent times, life expectancy was between 20 to 25 years of age. How can you get out of infancy when you're dying at 20? Psychologically, the human being did not progress much farther than the animistic or infantile phase. His world was therefore one of superstition, wildly and uncontrollably, the emotionality and the fear of the unknown. The rational apparatus, which affords us a truer reckoning of objective reality, is therefore an exceedingly recent development. And many people in today's world are just as psychologically primitive and arrested as our rural ancestors. And it wouldn't really be too much of a problem, would it? Except that they're at the top of the power pyramid. And we'll get to more of that later on. But this fact that even physical life, temporal life, was so short for a vast majority of people also has to be taken on board. See, we're a luxury today, whatever. You know, we think, oh yeah, we're all affluent and we live for longer periods of time, we have better food and all of this. We forget what it was like just not too long ago. And then, of course, as I said, this trauma, this schizophrenic nature of us, this conflict that's inside has played right into the hands of the controllers that I've often referred to as the sorcerers, because they work on that aspect, that these anxieties and fears. In fact, their tyrannies succeed. That's why they're able to march us off. Every 10 years or 5 years, they're marching us off to another genocidal blood ritual. Hasn't America got enough problems of its own domestically that it has to be bothering what's going on in the Middle East? No. Every few years, they're able to march us off to some mass death or horror. Because they kind of know what we're never supposed to know. They understand what we're never even supposed to guess about consciousness, which is that we don't really think with the mind, we think for the mind. And they also know that your individual sense of uniqueness, as we've pointed out before, your adjustment, your particular set of settings, so that you can go along to get along in the social persona, world of society, the collective. Your adjustment, the costume you wear to fit into the collective, you imagine that that's your real self? These sorcerers know it is not. Now, Maud Morgan says something interesting about the unconscious, because again, it's not a discovery of Sigmund Freud. He says the notion of the unconscious emerges first into religious discourse in the writings of the ancient Egyptians. It is the world beyond the horizon, and this as we've already commented, is strangely similar to the modern concept of the unconscious. In fact, the Egyptian word for it was exactly the same as what in German Freud chose. Id is just like the English it. Because not wanting to name that reservoir, that great unconscious, he just said it's the it, the id. And I believe that it was almost identical to the Egyptian word. It was just a two-letter word that the Egyptians also used for it. And of course, as I said, the great humanitarians of the world have always tried to make us aware of what I'm talking about. They've always tried to draw our attention to that control of the habitat. For instance, Rudolf Steiner, one of the great humanitarians, he gave a lecture in Stuttgart in 1918 and said, "There are in England occult societies which inspire English politics. They know the course of evolution for the next few decades and are using their knowledge for the material advantage of England. The English occultists are already in possession of knowledge which will soon enable employers to work their machines by the some force which will do away with most workmen. The mass of idle workmen will revolt in anger, but the English occultists know of the means which will subdue them. So, prophesizing what is to come. A.E. Waite, from the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, an author, he said that beneath the broad tide of human history there flow the stealthy undercurrents of the secret societies, which frequently determine in the depths the changes that take place upon the surface. One of the most important societies, one of them, was the Lunar Society, tying into the science world because its members were scientists. And Philip Darrell Collins writes about it in Paranoia magazine. He says that Erasmus Darwin, the grandfather of Charles Darwin, was the founder of the Lunar Society. So here's top scientists of the land, the ones whose pictures you see in all the history books, that scientists look up to and have bronze statues of, right? How many know what kind of secret societies they were belonging to and why? Well, he says that Erasmus Darwin, the grandfather of Charles Darwin, was the founder of the Lunar Society. The group's name owed itself to the fact that members met monthly at the time of the full moon. The membership boasted such luminaries as John Wilkinson, who made cannons, James Watts, who owed his notoriety to the steam engine, Matthew Boulton, a manufacturer, Joseph Priestley, a chemist, Josiah Wedgwood, who founded the famous pottery business, and Benjamin Franklin. Michael Bagent in Holy Blood, Holy Grail says that virtually all the Royal Society founding members were Freemasons. One could reasonably argue that the Royal Society itself, at least in its inception, was a Masonic institution. Another order, group, we'll mention a little later on as well, was known as the Hellfire Club, even though they didn't call themselves that. They call themselves the Monks of Medmenham was one of their names, and also of Wycombe Woods. Was founded by Sir Francis Dashwood, and he was made Chancellor of the Exchequer, no less. Other members were the son of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Potter, the Earl of Sandwich, member of the House of Lords, the Marquis of Bute, who became the Prime Minister of England, right? Charles Churchill, John Wilkes, and George Doddington, a member of the Cabinet. So again, top royalists, influential scientists, astronomers, all members of these orders, pagan orders, Masonic orders. In ancient times, you had a very strong opposition, of course, to this Black Lodge. They're called by many names. I refer to them as the Arya, or the Aryans, the true meaning of that word. One can call them Druids or Ammonists. They were the servants of truth and the keepers of the secrets of healing, both biologically and also geospherically. And we went into this, their history, very much in the Irish Origins of Civilization, the books and the DVD. And also we went into a very deep history of their adversaries, because you really couldn't have the establishment of one of these groups without the other, meaning that if one didn't exist, that's how the other came into being. And so we're talking genocide here. And that order has been known again also by many names, and one is the Brotherhood of the Snake, or the Dragon Court. And this Dragon Court is very important to know about. It also accounts for some of the symbolism we're going to look at a little later. But it started in Atlantis. It started in pre-Diluvian times. It moved to Egypt and was there, some people say, almost as far back as the 13th dynasty. And I believe that it continued up into and also through the reign of the famous pharaoh Akhenaten. In fact, I believe that his dynasty was the return of this dragon court that worked out of places like Memphis and Heliopolis, and later on from other places. And then it was expelled from Egypt and falls off the map at that time. But as my work shows, it didn't. It just moved west, in fact, about 1400 years BC.